there are hypocrisies upon the hypocrisies here. Clearly, one of them is that it refers to a well-regulated militia, and then they interpret it as saying that you can't regulate the guns, even though it's implicit that you could regulate the militia. It's actually said that, and that's why I think Chief Justice Berger said this is one of the
Yeah,
greatest frauds ever
yeah,
perpetrated on the American people. But it's also why I think you and I've talked about this. I think Democrats need to they need their own Project 2029. They need a clear plan when they go in. And frankly, I'm kind of one of those scorched earth Dems who's a little sick of Republicans doing whatever they want, with no regard for norms or rules or standards or even laws anymore. And I think the Democrats are going to need to come in and do some things. And you've written about this better than anybody else about, what should be the fate of the filibuster and what should be the fate of some of the rules of the Senate. But I think as we list the things that could have profound consequences, the Democrats have been afraid to do, and by the way, including our last Democratic president, Joe Biden, who called for review of the Supreme Court and took it and put it directly into the trash bin. He did not do anything with it. Should the Supreme Court have 13 members? There are, you know, there are that many judicial districts now in the United States. It makes sense to do it. Has the Supreme Court always had 9? No, it has not always had 9. Should there be term limits? Should there be other things we can do to regain rationality? Should that mean Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico should be states, or the bigger states should be broken up so their representation is fairer? So you don't have California with the fourth largest economy in the world, bigger than virtually every other major nation, with just a couple of exceptions, with the same number of Senate seats as Wyoming. I'm interested in the radical Norm Ornstein. If a president came in and said, "What do we do that's gonna really make a difference? What should it be?"
we do need major reforms, and I've crafted some and listed a bunch of others. You've mentioned a number of them. The Senate is going to be a huge challenge going forward. Another hobby horse of mine. Put Trump aside. God, I wish we could. But if we end up going past this era and move into something else, we still have a crisis of legitimacy, because we are almost at a point where 70% of Americans live in just 15 of our 50 states, which means 30% of Americans will elect 70 senators. And they do not represent the country, the diversity of the country, the economic dynamism of the country. And we're going to have a crisis of legitimacy. We need to alter the Senate. That will take a constitutional amendment. We ought to enlarge the House to change those districts. And there are ways to do it that would be workable. We need to have change in the rules in the Senate so that you can't have the burden on the supermajority to try and get anything meaningful done. We need to dramatically change the Supreme Court. And I agree with you on having 13 members and having term limits and having a code of ethics that's meaningful.
Yes.
But, my proposal there is, you don't just need a code of ethics that seems tough on the surface if nobody enforces it. And you cannot rely on the courts to police themselves any more than you can rely on doctors to police themselves, or lawyers to police themselves, or members of Congress to police themselves. So I had a hand in creating and crafting the Office of Congressional Ethics in the House, because you needed an independent outfit that could at least take allegations and build them into something that then the Congress itself, under the Constitution, could do something about, but they've been feckless in doing anything about that. What I want is an Office of Judicial Ethics that enforces an ethics code that consists of former judges and experts on legal ethics, and let them, recommend punishment for those who violate the code. And you would get a lot different kind of behavior. Instead, you have a Clarence Thomas who over and over again neglects to deliberately neglects to disclose the outrageous ethical misconduct, trips and other goodies given to him in large amounts, often by those who have interest before the court. And each time it happens, and he's discovered in his with his hand in that proverbial cookie jar, he says, "Oops, well, it was just an oversight, and I'll disclose it now in retrospect." He did that more than 15 years ago, I believe, was the first time. And then he's kept doing it, which makes it clear it's not an oversight, it's deliberate cover up. And nobody's going to do anything about it unless you have an ability to act on that. So there are a lot of things that we need to do structurally to change the political system, which will not be easy to do. But let's face it, David, in the immediate term, where we need triage as an autocracy marches forward, we're not getting what we need from Democrats.
Yeah, we're definitely not. But I want to encourage you. In fact, maybe you and I can go write this for someplace. But I'd like to see, a 10-point plan, a 12-point plan of structural reforms the Democrats need to plan to come in and do. And by the way, some of them have to, some of them are a little subtler. I'll give you one that I think is sort of under the radar at the moment. But I've talked to some people who are in the judiciary, and historically, they get protected by people like marshals, but the marshals report to the Justice Department, and the Justice Department reports to the President of the United States. And frankly, they're concerned. They're
As they should be.
concerned. They're
Yeah.
concerned that they are not secure if the President of the United States doesn't like their politics.
One of the
Uh,
first things he did was to fire the head of the Marshal Service to replace him with a crony.
right. And I think there are certain steps, but for the security of each of the branches of the government where things need to explicitly not be under the control of the executive.
Yeah, absolutely the case. And I've talked about structural reforms in the bag of promises that Democrats should make, things that they'll pledge to do. We also obviously need voting reforms to make it easy for people to vote and to guarantee those who are eligible the absolute right to vote. And we need campaign finance reforms back to keep a system from being completely tilted by multi-billionaires who pour huge sums in and who, as Elon Musk pretty much said to Donald Trump, "I bought and paid for you, and this is how you treat me."